Today's talk is entitled Science Mythology, and what I'm going to talk about is the likelihood of the existence of fairies in comparison to the mythological vacuum state. Now, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, so I'm going to talk about the vacuum. This state has not existed for much more than 100 odd years, and it is now a concept that people in the science world still hold, and yet it has been proved experimentally that the vacuum does not exist. Recently I was in a physics lecture and science demonstrations, and at the end of the lecture I spoke to the project leader of these experiments and the division. This division also receives data through the internet from CERN, and we're talking about the principles of the Big Bang and the constant speed of light, or at least I was arguing the case of these things, and I'll refer to those discussions at another time. But we came to a point where not excuses, but explanations were given to me. This man was a good scientist. He was at the top of his game. He had nearly at an age where he would be retiring, and you could see a genuine human being. I mean, I'm not talking about the spurious scientists now, and I may even do a video on that. But we came to a point where he mentioned about the constant speed of light in a vacuum, because I was talking about energy interactions with light and how it would slow it down. And of course he put his hand on his chin in a very contemplating what I'd said, because nobody had ever it was like from the scene from the Emperor's New Clothes, because I'd mentioned something that in all his science career no one has ever contemplated from a logical point of view. There's a lot of double talk in the Big Bang, and when you start putting those the logic together, it doesn't work. It doesn't work on a lot of levels. So of course he was holding his chin, contemplating what I'd said, and he said to me, "Of course you know there's no such thing as a vacuum, don't you?" Because that was my next argument with him, and I said, "Yes, I do." And he sort of nodded his head in a sort of acceptance that I wasn't being someone who was who's not thought about it, or had not contemplated it myself, about the logic of the universe, and also the logic of the vacuum state. So the vacuum, although the word the vacuum and the concept of the vacuum exists, it cannot because neutrinos can travel through in places where we think they're empty of any energy. We have cosmic rays that can enter. Even when we try to experimentally create this vacuum, we can't. So there is no state of emptiness of energy, and there is no vacuum, and the vacuum state hasn't lasted much more than 100 years. So this mythology now is worse than an ancient mythology, in fact, because it's still held on to as a concept, because people will refer to it, and it doesn't exist. It's a state that doesn't exist. I'll put it like this. I have a watertight bucket. So this is the double speak now, because you can add a vacuum into anything, and of course everyone will get the idea that it exists, but it doesn't. So I'll give you a comparison. I have a watertight bucket which leaks, and so you ask the person, hang on a moment, and some people just nod and say, oh yeah, that's right, this is what politicians do to us, this is what the Illuminati do to us. So we have a watertight bucket that leaks. So, is it watertight? And you can say, yes, it's watertight. Does it leak? Yes, it leaks. The vacuum. We can't have a watertight bucket that leaks. We cannot have a vacuum. They don't exist. Experimentally, we've proved that they don't. There's a small possibility that there may be a new scientific experiment, but basically we know that there's always a presence of energy everywhere. Space was a vacuum, which was a mythological state. The ancients always knew that space and everywhere had the ethers in it and energy. So whether you want to call the ethers the neutrinos and the cosmic rays, I'm pretty keen on thinking in those terms. Dark matter, dark energy will also transform themselves to be brought more closer to the ethers. So my comparison now is the fairy, and the fairy has existed as a concept of mythology for a lot longer, so it's also outlived the vacuum state, even though the vacuum state is still thought of in the minds of men. This is not in the mind of nature, this is in the mind of men. And so we have to then consider the fairy and its probability, because we can't. The fairy is made up of the metaphysical, and the metaphysical is untestable in some way. So whether the fairy is made up of the 96% that we don't know a great deal about, they call it dark matter, dark energy, we can call it the missing stuff, that we can't test for. The ancients would talk of the spirit world being the ethers, and so the ethers and this missing energy that's untestable is where I think it's one and the same of where the fairy would exist if we needed to test for it. And so because we can't test for it at this moment, and science will agree that it can't test for it because it can't find it, we have to say that there is a greater probability at this current moment that there is more likelihood that fairies exist than the vacuum. So it's 1-0 to the ancient mythology, and the vacuum is a state in the minds of men and not the mind of nature. Thank you very much. Goodbye.